In our passage today, we're circling back to the lesson that Jesus had started teaching his disciples about love, about how to conduct themselves in his absence. And he had started saying, this is the new commandment, that you love one another in the same way that I am loving you. And now he's circling back. We're in John 14, starting at verse 15, and it says, if you love me, you will keep my commandments. And this sounds sort of easy in theory, right? Just obey. But I'm sure we all know reality is a very different thing, and Jesus knew it too. So how did he say that he was going to help them obey?
Well, he said that he'd ask the Father to send them a helper, one who would be with them forever, who would live in them and be with them. And this helper, the Holy Spirit, would come in Jesus' name and would teach them everything that they needed to know and would help them remember everything that Jesus was teaching them.
Mm-hmm. And the word helper, it comes from the Greek word parakletos, which is translated into our English words helper, advocate, counselor, comforter, intercessor. And so how would the Holy Spirit fulfill these different roles in believers' lives?
Mm-hmm. He will comfort them with his indwelling presence. He will intercede for believers according to God's will, and he'll help believers understand and remember Jesus' teaching.
Yeah, so these are all things that Jesus did for his disciples while he was with them. His physical presence was their comfort. He was their mediator. He was their teacher. Yes, Jesus was going to be leaving them, but he wouldn't be leaving them alone.
And so as Jesus is preparing them for life without him, he stresses first the fact that they need to live in obedience to his commands. And again, John 14:15, if you love me, you'll obey my commands. In this sentence, what comes first?
The love comes first.
And so do you think the order is important? Do you think it matters that the love comes before the obedience?
Yeah, I think it does, because obedience that flows out of love looks very different than forced obedience.
Yeah, I agree. It speaks to motive. So if the motive for obedience is an outpouring of love, then it's a choice. It's a desire. It's the difference between legalism and grace.
So do you think that Jesus' disciples modeled or demonstrated perfect love or perfect obedience?
I think it's safe to say the answer to both of those is no. They loved themselves more than Jesus at times, and they often just didn't listen carefully, and their obedience reflected that.
Yeah.
The disciples must have known that if Jesus was leaving them, that they definitely need another helper. They knew that they wouldn't be able to do this on their own.
Yeah, and even with the promised helper, they still wouldn't love or obey perfectly, but all who love Christ have an advocate in him.
So why does Jesus say in John 14 that the helper is only going to come to those who love Jesus? Why won't the helper be sent to everyone?
Well, because of free will and choice. Why would he come to people who don't love him? If they don't want what's being offered in Jesus, why would they be offered more?
Exactly. And I mean, that's where if obedience is the gatekeeper, you might get compliance, but it will probably be motivated by either fear, maybe the desire to manipulate or control. And so how does all of this connect to the peace that Jesus offers his disciples?
Well, true or lasting peace, it can't be maintained through force or the threat of force. Maybe you can have an uneasy peace, but that kind of peace is more like power than true peace.
So Judas, not Judas Iscariot, he had already left to betray Jesus, but Judas asked Jesus, okay, so if you really are the Messiah, why don't you show yourself to the world? Why didn't Jesus show himself to everyone? Why was he not bringing his peace to everyone?
Well, Jesus' plan was never to come and impose himself on the world, but to offer himself for the world. He knows the hearts of all mankind. He knows the ones that want him for what he can do for them, but who don't really want himself.
Yeah, people who are looking more for a genie in a bottle than a savior, or people who wanted someone they could manipulate and control for their own gain and their own glory.
And Jesus knew some would reject him, but he also knew there was those who would recognize him and who would receive him, and they would be the ones who would want more of him. People who would love him imperfectly, but this love would grow, and as the love grows, then the obedience would grow out of a longing to obey more. And so to these people, Jesus said, I will send the helper, the advocate, the consolation. And Jesus offers these people the intimate relationship of abiding. And so we're going to see in our next teaching session that these are also the people to whom Jesus offers the fullness of joy. So we have love and peace and joy. And they are all found fully and completely only in Jesus. So see you next week.
Bye.